Hey you guys, it's Tonya Gibbs, and today I want to share with you a watercolor Christmas card tutorial. This is a super simple card that is easy enough for anyone to do. I promise you can do it. This card is also very flat, so you can easily mail it. We're going to feature this stamp from Stampendous today. This is a cling rubber stamp. This is called the Cling Create a Poinsettia. It comes with this gorgeous stamp, a little sentiment stamp, as well as a couple of stencils in there, and it also is sold separately as a coordinating die set to cut out these poinsettias, so if you're interested in that. Now, for your convenience, I am going to link up the blog post down below that has a list of all of the products that were used, as well as some photos of the finished project. So for my panel here, I did not use watercolor paper because I do want to stamp on this and I am going to emboss it. So I wanted the ridges to be extremely crisp. You can use any cardstock that you have. I recommend a very heavy bond, like a 110 or at least an 80-pound bond or higher. I am going to be using a piece of scrap cardstock from Canvas Core. The B side or the A side of this has a pattern on it. This was in my scrap pile, and the B side happened to be a solid ivory color, so I'm going to utilize that today and use up some of those scraps in that scrap pile. But by all means, if you have some solid cardstock that's a 80-pound to 110-pound, that would be perfect. I just wanted a smooth texture since I'm going to be heat embossing. So I used my Versa ink to ink up the stamp, and then I've heat embossed that with some gold embossing powder there. Now this gold powder, I believe the name has changed. It's a Ranger Gold embossing powder. It's called Queen's Gold. I believe they've changed the name to Princess Gold. So the palette that you see there on the left, I actually created that in my Ustream in October. It was a full-bodied watercolor paints that were primary colors of red, yellow, and blue, and then I added a cyan. And what I did then was mix them to create the secondary colors. So I will link up the post for that tutorial. They're inside of an ice cream, or an ice cube tray, and then once they dry out, all I have to do is spritz them with water to reconstitute them so that I can use them again over and over again. So that's what all I've done here is just spritz them with a little spritz of water, and until the pigment is all gone, they're good to go. Once they've dried out, they're easy to store. So for my coloring over here on the right, what I'm doing is I'm just adding the pigment. Now, since these are full-bodied watercolors, they're very rich in pigment. So if I add a very tiny bit of water, I'm getting that really rich dark tone. And then, of course, the more water I add, I'm getting that lighter pink tone that you see there. Now, with these types of paints, the reds are very, very strong in pigment. So a very tiny bit goes a long way. I am using a number 0, I think, round brush, or it might even be a liner brush for this. And notice I'm not paying very close attention to where the lines are with the red. I'm going right over it, because at the very end you're going to see me take a paper towel and blot up, and that's going to lift all that color right off that embossing powder to reveal all of that luscious gold embossing powder again and give me back those crisp lines. So it is watercolor, which means I can remove it easily with water. So I'm just going to give everything a really nice clean wash. I'm going to add the darker colors towards some of the leaves so I get a little bit of a contrast. So notice that the leaves, what I'm doing is I'm adding dark and then maybe a light color and then a little darker and then a lighter, and then I'll come back and add shadows later. Also keep in mind that with watercolors, they dry lighter than what you see, so I'm paying attention to that. And since I'm not using watercolor paper, I want to be very careful not to oversaturate my paper so that I don't end up with a lot of wrinkles and buckling in the paper. And I also don't want the paper to rag or bead up as I'm doing this. So if I add a lot of water, I'm going to move on to another section instead of scrubbing at the paper and removing some of the rag. Once I am certain that every petal on the flower has a pigment on it, I'm going to give it a good wash over just to make sure that I don't have any like real brush lines or stroke lines. And then I'm going to come back with my yellow and then put that into the center there, where the center of the flower is. And I'm just kind of blotting it down. I want some really good saturation there. I want that to be really, really bold. Then I've taken some of that red and added, I've picked up a little bit of the paint that has the red, but it also has a little bit of the blue in it, so it's a little bit more of a shadow color, and it has a really nice rich tone to it. And I'm adding it to those shadowed areas just underneath the petals where there would be darker areas, and creating some really nice tonal effects here in the darker areas of the petals. So if you don't have this expensive watercolor set, you can totally do this with a Crayola watercolor set. The point of this is that really, truly, all you need is a red, a yellow, possibly a blue and a green. Whenever I created this watercolor palette I shared with you guys, all you really need are the primary colors, and you can make any color in the rainbow. And it's very important, if you go back and you really pay attention to that tutorial that we did in October, you'll understand that just by simply adding two of these colors together, you can come up with any color in the rainbow, honestly. So I don't want to get into too much detail here within this tutorial because there's not really time for it, and I've already covered it in another class. So like I said, I want to encourage you to go back and check those other tutorials out. Now I'm just going to go back and add some berries. I'm going to stay away from that poinsettia, allow it to dry. I don't want to overwork it and get too much going on that paper. Like I said, it's not watercolor paper, and the more I scrub at it, it's going to really degrade the surface of the paper. So I'm going to go ahead and work in some of my berries. I want them to be really dry before I try and add any green areas. So when I start adding my green pigment, I'm going to stay away from any place that I have added any of the red. I don't want it to touch because it'll bleed into it, and that's not what I'm after. So I'm going to go into some of my mistletoe area. Now, if you wanted to, you could definitely wash right over the gold and do some of that negative area around the pine needles, but I wanted my pine needles to stay kind of gold. I didn't want them to have the green in them, but this is your painting. You do what you like to do and how you like it to look. So now it's time to start adding a few little shadows. So I'm putting a hint of green there in the center of all of that yellow, and then I'm going to come back with a little bit more of the green in some of the areas that was dry, and just go right over the top of it one more time. I had made a little bit of a mistake there on the right with that petal, so I'm taking some water to see if I can desaturate some of that red. That's the problem with red. It happens with Copic markers. It happens with watercolor. If red bleeds, it just bleeds. There's nothing you can do about it. But that's okay. We'll fix it in a few minutes. It won't be so obvious. Now I'm coming back with a little bit more of that intense red and just going and adding in a few more of those shadows. Like I said, as it dries, you'll really be able to see that dark, rich tone. And when the painting starts to dry, that's when it really kind of pops and comes to life, and you can really see where things bend and see where the shadows and the tones are. So if you're noticing that it looks somewhat flat when it's dry, then just go back and add a few more shadows to it. So now I'm coming back with a little bit of blue, and I'm just going to do some negative painting in this area. I really wanted this to stay ivory, but when I made that little bit of a mistake there with the bleed out, I decided to go ahead and do a wash of blue over the top. And then after I did it, I was really glad I did, because it really helped for my poinsettia to really pop off the page, and the gold just really popped as well. So sometimes mistakes are good and happy mistakes. So now I've moved up to a number 10 round brush, and I'm just doing some really heavy saturation of water there. And like I said, it looks really dark here, but one, the lighting's terrible because it's really early in the morning, but also that paper is very wet, so once it dries it'll be a little lighter. Now I've just taken some white paint and diluted it down in a little cup there. I just use packaging for cups, and once they dry out I hang them up on my board there by my desk and hang on to them. So now it's time to do the inside of the card. This is a stamp from Ink-A-Dink-A-Doo. It's 97342mm. It says Merry Christmas in script. I've had it for years. I'm going to try and center it there in the center of the card at the bottom. I decided I wanted it at the bottom in the center because I wanted to have plenty of space to write my message there above. So I'm going to heat emboss that as well. And it gives a really nice finished look to the inside of my card. I just really love this. So then I decided I needed a little more gold around the edges of my card. So I'm going to just touch the edges with my Versa ink pad and come back with my embossing powder and just give a really nice gilded edge to that. So for my card base, I've just chosen a stack of 8.5 by 11 cardstock that I can get 2 cards per sheet. So I've trimmed it down so that it's an A2 top folding card, which is 4.25 by 5.5, and I'm just using the ATG tape to affix my card panels. If you wanted more dimension, you could put your top on with foam adhesive, but I wanted to put these in the mail, so I wanted to keep them relatively flat, and they are absolutely gorgeous, as you can see here, and it gives a really nice elegant touch to have all of this gold foiling on here. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today through this process video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and Merry Christmas to everyone. I hope you have a fantastic holiday. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to share it with a friend, and if you do decide to follow along with me, #following Tonya Gibbs in your social media.